A question that wouldn't leave me. Have you ever noticed that the questions you try hardest to avoid are the ones that follow you the farthest? This video is about one of those questions. It's about moving to America, learning English slowly, stumbling through weather, culture, love, marriage, paperwork, and silence, and discovering that the real lesson wasn't grammar or pronunciation. It was forgiveness. Maybe you're tired of starting English again. Maybe you're tired of starting life again. This story is for you, because somewhere inside it hides one simple question: what are you ready to forgive? Imagine this. You are standing alone at a bus stop in a country that looks familiar from movies but feels strangely distant in real life. The sky is wide. The air feels different on your skin. And your brain is busy translating everything, even your own thoughts. That was me on my first weeks in America. And no matter how many new words I learned each day, one sentence kept repeating quietly in my head, like a song I didn't choose. I should have done better before. You know that voice. Your brain loves playing old mistakes on repeat. Neuroscientists say the brain is a prediction machine. It uses the past to guess the future. So if your past feels heavy, your brain assumes the future will be heavy too. Mine did that very well. I came to America thinking I was starting fresh, but my past packed itself neatly into my emotional suitcase and arrived before I did. At first, I thought my biggest challenge would be English. New sounds. New rhythm. People speaking fast like they're late for something important. When you learn English as an adult, your brain doesn't absorb, it negotiates. Every sentence feels like paperwork. And paperwork, as you will learn in America, is everywhere. But something surprised me. The hardest part wasn't speaking. It was being silent. Silence is the first language many immigrants learn. You stay quiet because you don't want to sound wrong. You stay quiet because thinking takes time. You stay quiet because your accent feels louder than your ideas. Psychologists call this linguistic insecurity. Your confidence shrinks not because you know nothing, but because you know too much about your own mistakes. So you smile. You nod. You say yes even when you don't understand the question. And in that silence, the question came back again. What are you ready to forgive? Not in English. Not yet. It came in my native thoughts, clear and sharp. I remembered choices I regretted. Relationships I left unfinished. Times I quit too early. Moving to America didn't erase them. The colder weather just made them feel sharper. In some states, winter doesn't gently arrive. It attacks. And that's what memory does when you're tired. It attacks when your defenses are low. Here's something interesting. Studies show that when we're under stress, new country, new language, new identity, the brain's threat system activates more often. That system doesn't care about your English goals. It cares about safety. And to stay safe, it reminds you of pain. It whispers, "Don't fail again." That whisper almost stopped me from learning. Almost stopped me from loving. Almost stopped me from trying. But America has a strange way of forcing reflection. You drive long distances. You wait in lines. You sit alone with coffee that tastes stronger than you expected. And during those quiet moments, you either numb yourself with distraction, or you listen. I listened. And I realized the question wasn't accusing me. It was inviting me. Forgiveness sounds big, dramatic, like something you announce in a movie scene. In reality, it starts very small. It starts when you stop replaying a moment for the 100th time. It starts when you allow yourself to learn English like a child again, slow, messy, imperfect. Language teachers will tell you that repetition builds fluency. Therapists will tell you the same thing about emotional healing. Repetition, but with kindness. So I tried something simple. Every day, I practiced English using my own story. Short sentences. Real feelings. No fancy vocabulary. I would say things like, I felt lost. I was afraid. I am learning. Simple English, but honest. And something unexpected happened. The more gently I spoke to myself, the easier the words came out. This is why learning English through stories works. Your brain remembers emotion better than rules. Cognitive science calls this emotional encoding. When a word is tied to a feeling, it sticks. When a sentence reflects your life, it breathes. I wasn't just learning English. I was reorganizing my memories into a language that allowed space instead of shame. The question didn't disappear. But it changed. It became softer. Curious. What are you ready to forgive today? Not forever. Just today. Yesterday's version of me. Yesterday's accent. Yesterday's fear. Standing at that bus stop weeks later, I noticed something different. I was still quiet, but not invisible. I understood more. I forgave more. And for the first time since arriving, America didn't feel like a test. It felt like a classroom where mistakes were allowed. So if you're listening to this and feeling behind, stuck, or tired of restarting English, let me say this plainly. Your problem is not laziness. It's unhealed pressure. And pressure doesn't respond to force. It responds to permission. Maybe that's where your journey starts too. Not with a textbook. Not with perfect pronunciation. But with one honest question you stop running from. What are you ready to forgive? Arriving in a different climate. The first conversation I truly had with America wasn't spoken in English at all. It was spoken by the air. The moment I stepped outside, my lungs noticed before my mind did. The temperature felt sharper, the light brighter or duller depending on the season, and suddenly my body behaved differently. Shoulders lifted. Steps shortened. Breathing adjusted. Climate, I learned quickly, is not background decoration. It's a quiet instructor that teaches you how to exist in a place. Back where I came from, weather changed politely. In America, weather makes decisions. In some regions, summer arrives early and overstays its welcome, heavy and unapologetic. In others, winter moves in like a strict landlord, demanding layers, preparation, and respect. I wasn't ready for that. And without realizing it, my mood started sinking with the forecast. Sunny days gave me courage. Gray skies pulled old memories to the surface. Psychology explains this better than motivation speeches ever could. Light exposure affects serotonin. Cold affects muscle tension and sleep. When your body is busy regulating temperature, your brain has fewer resources for learning. That matters when you're trying to listen, read, and speak English every day. Cognitive load builds quietly. You think you're failing at language, but your nervous system is just overwhelmed. I remember standing at a crosswalk one freezing morning. Snow piled along the curb like forgotten luggage. People walked fast, eyes forward, efficient. I copied them, even though my body wanted to slow down. That's one of the first cultural lessons America teaches you through climate. Keep moving. Don't linger too long in discomfort. But internally, I was lingering everywhere. Learning English in that state felt like swimming in cold water. You tense up. You breathe shallowly. You survive instead of explore. When someone spoke quickly, my brain didn't just translate words, it also managed stress, embarrassment, and the fear of responding incorrectly. Linguists call this affective filter. When anxiety rises, comprehension drops. No amount of grammar study fixes that. The strange part was how familiar this felt. The climate outside mirrored the climate inside me. I had carried emotional seasons across the ocean. Regret from earlier choices. Guilt from relationships that ended without closure. Pressure to make it work in America. Cold weather didn't create those feelings. It simply gave them space to echo. One winter evening, driving through long, empty roads, I noticed how quiet everything was. Snow absorbs sound. That silence can feel peaceful, or painfully loud if you're not used to your own thoughts. Mine returned to the same question that had been following me since arrival. What are you ready to forgive? It sounded different in the cold. Less urgent. More honest. Here's what surprised me. When I stopped fighting the climate, learning became easier. Instead of complaining about the cold, I described it in simple English. It is very cold today. My hands hurt. The sky is gray. These sentences were basic, almost childish. But they were real. Language experts call this embodied learning, connecting words to physical sensation. The brain stores that more deeply than abstract vocabulary lists. Cultural differences showed up here too. Americans talk about weather constantly. It's safe. Neutral. A social handshake. When my English failed me, weather saved me. Saying cold today, opened conversations without demanding perfection. Each small interaction gave my brain a tiny reward. Dopamine released. Confidence rebuilt, quietly. Neuroscience tells us that progress accelerates when we feel safe. Safety isn't comfort. It's permission. Permission to speak slowly. Permission to mispronounce. Permission to pause. Climate taught me that adaptation is not weakness. It's intelligence. Trees don't argue with seasons. They adjust. But climate also affects emotional memory. Studies show that cold and darkness can intensify rumination, especially for people far from familiar environments. I mistook that for personal failure. I thought I was losing motivation to learn English. In truth, I was processing grief for the version of life I left behind, and the version of myself that hadn't arrived yet. Recognizing that changed my strategy. Instead of forcing longer study sessions, I shortened them. Slower audio. Warmer environments. More repetition, less pressure. Language learning became a form of self-regulation rather than self-punishment. My English improved not because I pushed harder, but because I listened better to my body, not just the language. One afternoon, watching sunlight reflect off melting snow, I realized something simple and profound. America wasn't testing me. It was training me. Climate included. Culture included. Even the discomfort. Each season asked a different skill: patience in winter, courage in summer, flexibility in spring, gratitude in fall. And again, that question surfaced, not as an accusation, but as guidance. What are you ready to forgive today? The days you couldn't study because you were exhausted. The conversations you avoided because your accent felt too loud. The belief that learning should look the same in every environment. Forgiveness, I learned, is climate sensitive. You don't demand growth from frozen ground. You wait. You prepare. You trust the process. And slowly, without announcement, something shifts. If you're learning English in a new country and everything feels heavier than expected, look beyond vocabulary. Look at the air, the light, the season you're living in. Your struggle may not be linguistic. It may be environmental. And that means it's temporary. You're not behind. You're adjusting. Silence was my first English. Silence doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks polite. It looks calm. It looks like someone who is listening carefully. But inside, silence can be loud enough to shake your ribs. When I arrived in America, silence became my most fluent language. Not because I wanted it, but because it felt safer than being wrong out loud. In the beginning, I spoke very little. I knew words. I knew grammar rules. I had studied before coming. But when real people stood in front of me, English escaped. My tongue stiffened. My thoughts queued up like traffic with no green light. So I smiled. I nodded. I said okay to questions I only half understood. Silence protected me from embarrassment, but it also slowly erased me from the room. Psychology has a name for this: social withdrawal under linguistic stress. When the brain senses a high risk of negative judgment, it chooses avoidance. That choice feels logical. You avoid mistakes. You avoid correction. You avoid that tiny laugh people make when they don't mean harm, but your nervous system hears danger anyway. Silence becomes armor. The problem with armor is that it's heavy. Carry it long enough, and you forget how to move freely. I noticed it in small moments. At grocery stores, when the cashier asked a friendly question and I answered with one word. At work, when I had an idea but kept it trapped behind perfect grammar that never arrived. At home, when my own thoughts felt stuck between languages, belonging fully to neither. Silence also changes how time feels. Conversations move on without you. Jokes land late or not at all. You replay interactions hours later, thinking of the sentence you could have said. Linguists call this delayed processing. It's common in second language learners, especially adults. Your brain is translating, filtering, monitoring accent, and managing emotion all at once. Silence is not absence of thought. It's overflow. What made it harder was how silence was interpreted. In some American contexts, quiet can read as disinterest or lack of confidence. Back home, silence often meant respect. Here, it felt like invisibility. Cultural mismatch layered on top of language difficulty, creating a quiet loneliness that didn't show up in textbooks. At night, when everything slowed down, my silence turned inward. Old memories surfaced. Mistakes replayed. The brain loves filling quiet space with unfinished stories. Neuroscience shows that when external input decreases, the default mode network activates, the part of the brain responsible for self-reflection and memory. That's where regret lives. That's where the question waited for me again. What are you ready to forgive? I realized something uncomfortable. Part of what I needed to forgive was my own silence. I had judged it harshly, calling it weakness. But silence was actually my nervous system asking for time. Children are silent before they speak. Muscles rest before they strengthen. Silence wasn't failure. It was incubation. So I changed how I practiced English. Instead of forcing conversation, I narrated my silence. Quietly at first. Then softly out loud. I am thinking. I need a moment. I don't know how to say this yet. These sentences were simple, but powerful. They turned silence into communication. Language teachers call this meta-communication, talking about the process itself. It lowers pressure and increases clarity. Something surprising happened. People responded kindly. Slower speech. Rephrased questions. Gentle smiles instead of rushed impatience. My brain noticed. Safety increased. And when safety increases, the brain releases less cortisol, more dopamine. Learning becomes possible again. Silence also taught me how to listen deeply. When you're not busy planning your next sentence, you hear rhythm, emotion, intention. I began to understand English not just as words, but as movement. Stress patterns. Pauses. The way meaning changes with tone. Listening became my secret advantage. There's research to support this. Studies show that strong listening skills often develop before speaking fluency, especially in immersive environments. Silence trains comprehension muscles. The mistake is staying silent forever. The growth happens when silence becomes a bridge, not a hiding place. I remember one specific moment. Sitting in a small waiting room, Surrounded by conversations I didn't fully understand, I felt the familiar urge to disappear. Instead, I tried something new. When my name was called, I said, slowly, "My English is not perfect, but I will try." The sentence wasn't impressive, but it was honest. And honesty carries confidence even when grammar doesn't. That day didn't change my English overnight, but it changed my relationship with silence. Silence was no longer my enemy. It was my starting point. A pause, not a prison. Forgiveness played a role here too. I forgave myself for every conversation I avoided. Every moment I chose quiet over courage. Shame keeps silence locked in place. Forgiveness loosens it. When you stop punishing yourself for being quiet, your voice returns naturally, without force. If you're learning English and find yourself silent more often than you want to be, listen closely. Your silence is telling a story. It might be saying you're overloaded, or careful, or healing. None of those are wrong. The goal isn't to erase silence. It's to use it wisely. Speak when you're ready. Pause when you need. Let silence support you, not shrink you. And when that familiar question comes back, as it always does, maybe today the answer is simple. Forgive yourself for being quiet while you were learning how to speak again. Cultural shock at the dinner table. The first real culture shock didn't happen at work, on the street, or in an English class. It happened at a dinner table. Not a dramatic one. No arguments. No raised voices. Just plates, forks, and a quiet confusion I couldn't explain at the time. Food was familiar, but the rules around it were not. And that's how culture works. It hides inside normal moments, waiting for you to assume too much. Back home, meals were events. People talked at the same time. Someone always asked if you were full, even when you clearly were. Silence at the table meant something was wrong. In America, the table felt calmer, almost minimalist. Everyone had their own plate. Conversations took turns. People ate quickly, efficiently, as if food were fuel instead of ceremony. Nobody insisted. Nobody hovered. And nobody noticed that I was eating slower, watching more than chewing. Anthropologists say shared meals are one of the strongest carriers of cultural values. They teach hierarchy, boundaries, and belonging without using words. That's why the dinner table hit me harder than any English test. My brain wasn't just translating language. It was recalibrating identity. I worried constantly about doing the wrong thing. Should I start eating now or wait? Is it rude to refuse food? Why does everyone say I'm good instead of no? My English vocabulary knew the words, but my cultural intuition lagged behind. Cultural psychologists call this implicit norm confusion. You don't know what rule you broke, but you feel the tension anyway. This confusion bled into language learning. When you're unsure of social rules, speaking feels riskier. You're not just choosing words. You're choosing behavior. The cognitive load doubles. My sentences became shorter at the table. I laughed when others laughed. I avoided questions that might expose how lost I felt. Silence returned, this time flavored with politeness. One evening, someone said, "Help yourself," and meant it literally. I froze. Back home, that phrase was an invitation wrapped in obligation. Here, it was a boundary. No pressure. No second offer. My brain hesitated too long, and the moment passed. It felt small, but it wasn't. These moments stack up. They quietly teach you that your instincts need updating. Psychology explains why this is exhausting. The brain relies on schemas, mental shortcuts built from experience. When schemas don't match reality, the brain works harder, scanning for mistakes. That's mentally expensive. It's also why many immigrants feel drained after social gatherings, even enjoyable ones. You're running background software the entire time. Language learning through these moments is slow but deep. I started paying attention to how people used simple phrases around food. No worries. I'm fine. Maybe later. Short sentences, light tone, clear boundaries. This was English doing cultural work. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just practical. Observing this taught me more than any formal lesson. Then there was family culture. In American households, children often speak freely at the table. They negotiate. They express preferences openly. At first, this felt strange. In my head, respect sounded quieter. But watching this taught me something important. English wasn't just a language of rules. It was a language of self-expression. That realization shifted how I practiced speaking. I didn't need to sound perfect. I needed to sound real. Marriage added another layer. Sharing meals as a couple in a new culture exposes everything: habits, expectations, emotional patterns. Who cooks? Who cleans? Who decides what's for dinner? In America, these questions often come without fixed answers. That freedom felt overwhelming. Back home, roles were clearer. Here, everything required conversation. And conversation required English. Conflict showed up quietly at the table too. Not shouting. Just pauses. Different expectations about time, food, and attention. Studies on intercultural relationships show that many misunderstandings come from everyday routines, not big values. Dinner is one of the most common friction points. Realizing this helped me stop blaming myself, or my English, when tension appeared. That familiar question came back again, sitting between the plates. What are you ready to forgive? The version of yourself who didn't know the rules? The moments you misread politeness as distance? Forgiveness became a social skill, not just an emotional one. I forgave myself for not knowing. I forgave others for not explaining. Slowly, the table became a classroom instead of a test. I practiced English with food-related sentences. I like this. I'm not hungry yet. Can we eat later? Simple phrases, repeated in real life. Linguists call this high-frequency functional language, the kind that builds confidence fastest because you use it daily. Over time, something softened. I stopped watching my hands so much. I spoke more naturally. I understood when silence meant comfort, not rejection. The dinner table stopped being a place of quiet anxiety and became what it was meant to be, a place of connection, even imperfect connection. Culture shock doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives politely, sits down, and waits for you to notice. When you do, learning begins. Not just of language, but of flexibility. If you're learning English and feel strangely tense during simple social moments, look closely. It might not be your vocabulary. It might be your cultural map updating itself in real time. That process takes patience. And maybe tonight, when you sit down to eat, wherever you are, take a breath. You're not behind. You're adapting. One meal, one sentence, one quiet act of forgiveness at a time. Love spoke faster than English. Love arrived before my English was ready. Not poetically. Not dramatically. Just suddenly, like a conversation that starts while you're still flipping through the dictionary. I didn't have the words, but feelings don't wait for grammar. They show up, sit down, and expect to be acknowledged. That's how I learned that language is not always the first bridge between two people. Sometimes emotion builds the bridge, and language has to catch up. At that time, my English lived in short sentences. Present tense. Simple structure. Safe territory. Love, on the other hand, demanded complexity. Past stories. Future plans. Emotional nuance. All the things textbooks save for later chapters. My brain panicked. My heart didn't care. Psychologists say emotional connection often precedes verbal precision. Humans evolved to read tone, facial expression, rhythm, long before structured language existed. That explained why I could understand care, irritation, warmth, and disappointment long before I could explain myself properly. Love felt clear. Explaining love did not. Early conversations were slow and uneven. I chose words carefully, like stepping on stones across a river. Sometimes I made it across. Sometimes I slipped. When I didn't know a word, I paused too long. Silence filled the space again, but this time it felt different. Less defensive. More vulnerable. Silence with someone you care about feels heavier, but also more honest. There's a concept in linguistics called pragmatic competence. It's the ability to use language appropriately in social and emotional contexts, not just correctly. I lacked it. I could say I am fine, but not I feel overwhelmed but I don't want to disappoint you. That gap caused misunderstandings. Small ones at first. Then bigger ones. Love magnifies everything. Mispronunciations become jokes. Missed meanings become wounds. When my English failed, frustration filled the gap. Not anger, confusion. Both of us wanted to be understood. Neither of us had the perfect tools. Intercultural relationship research shows that language imbalance often creates power imbalance. One person explains. The other reacts. That dynamic is exhausting if left unspoken. I noticed how often I nodded instead of asking questions. How often I agreed because disagreement required better English. This is called compliance through limitation. You don't choose silence because you agree. You choose it because arguing takes more language than you have. Over time, this erodes authenticity. Learning English through love is intense. Every sentence carries weight. I'm tired can mean physical exhaustion or emotional distance. Tone matters. Timing matters. One wrong word can echo longer than intended. But here's the unexpected gift. Emotion creates memory. Words spoken during meaningful moments stick harder. Neuroscience calls this emotional tagging. The brain marks those words as important. So I learned English in fragments of feeling. I miss you. I need space. I didn't mean that. Simple sentences, repeated in real life, attached to real consequences. No app can simulate that. Love forced my English to grow muscles I didn't know I needed. Cultural differences complicated things further. In American culture, emotional expression is often direct. Feelings are named. Boundaries are verbalized. Back home, care was shown through actions, not explanations. That mismatch caused friction. When asked, "How do you feel?" my brain froze. Feelings lived inside me, not in sentences. Therapists note that emotional literacy varies across cultures. It's not that some people feel less. They label differently. Learning English meant learning a new emotional vocabulary. Not just words, but permission. Permission to say I'm hurt without apology. Permission to say I don't know without losing value. Love exposed my unfinished past too. Old patterns resurfaced. Fear of abandonment. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of not being enough in a second language. And there it was again, quietly present. What are you ready to forgive? Past relationships. Past mistakes. The version of yourself who loved without language. I realized forgiveness wasn't optional here. Without it, every misunderstanding felt personal. With it, mistakes became information. When I forgave myself for imperfect English, I spoke more. When I forgave my partner for impatience, listening improved. Forgiveness created space for learning on both sides. Practically, I changed how I practiced English. I focused on emotional sentences. Not advanced vocabulary. High-frequency emotional phrases. I feel confused. I need time. Can you explain again? These sentences saved relationships. Language teachers call this survival communication. Relationship therapists call it honesty. Slowly, love stopped feeling like a test. It became a classroom with feedback. Sometimes gentle. Sometimes painful. Always real. My English improved not because I studied harder, but because I cared deeply about being understood and understanding in return. One night, during a difficult conversation, I spoke slowly and imperfectly, but I didn't stop. I didn't switch to silence. I didn't apologize for my accent. When I finished, the room felt lighter. Not because the problem was solved, but because I showed up fully. That mattered more than grammar. Love doesn't require fluent English. But it demands presence. And presence grows language naturally. If you're learning English through relationships, romantic or otherwise, know this. Your struggle is not weakness. It's courage in progress. Sometimes love speaks first, and language follows. Let it. Forgive yourself for learning out of order. Marriage under pressure. Marriage in a new country doesn't break loudly. It stretches quietly. At first, everything looks normal from the outside. Two people sharing space, schedules, responsibilities. But underneath, pressure builds in places you didn't know existed. Language. Culture. Expectations. And time. Especially time. America moves fast, and marriage here doesn't slow down to wait for your English to catch up. When we first started living together, I thought love would be enough. Love plus effort plus patience. That equation works in movies. In real life, marriage is mostly communication, and communication depends on language. Not poetic language. Functional language. Daily language. The kind you use when you're tired, stressed, and hungry at the same time. Small things became surprisingly heavy. Who does what around the house? How money is discussed. How plans are made. In my culture, many of these roles were implied. In America, they are negotiated. Negotiation requires clarity. Clarity requires words. And my words were limited. Psychologists describe this stage as role ambiguity. When expectations are unclear, stress increases. Each partner assumes the other understands. When misunderstanding happens, it feels personal. My English struggled most during conflict. Not because I didn't care, but because conflict demands precision. You can't fix a problem you can't describe. Arguments didn't sound dramatic. They sounded quiet and unresolved. Pauses that lasted too long. Sentences that ended early. I wanted to explain how I felt, but emotions don't wait politely while you search for vocabulary. By the time I found the words, the moment had passed, leaving frustration behind. There's research showing that couples with language imbalance often argue about logistics, not feelings. Dishes. Schedules. Bills. These are safer topics than vulnerability. I noticed that pattern in myself. I could say, we need to do this, but not, I feel lonely when this happens. One requires instruction. The other requires exposure. Marriage under immigration pressure adds another layer. Legal documents. Policies. Deadlines. Decisions that affect both people but are often explained in complex English. My brain felt constantly behind. Stress hormones stayed high. Neuroscience shows that chronic stress reduces access to language centers in the brain. That's why words disappear when you need them most. I started to feel like a child again. needing help, asking for repetition, depending on someone else to explain the world. That dynamic can quietly shift power in a relationship. Not intentionally, not cruelly, but dependency changes tone. I worried about becoming invisible again, this time inside my own marriage. That familiar question returned, sharper now. What are you ready to forgive? Not just the past. The present version of yourself who needed support. The partner who didn't always understand what silence meant. Forgiveness became necessary for survival, not just healing. Therapists often say that marriage is not about avoiding conflict, but learning how to repair. Repair requires language, but not perfect language. It requires intention. I started using repair phrases. Simple, repeatable sentences. I am not angry. I am tired. I don't know how to say this yet. Can we talk later? These phrases lowered tension immediately. They created pause instead of escalation. Language educators call this formulaic language. Ready-made chunks that carry meaning efficiently. You don't build them from scratch under pressure. You memorize them when calm. Marriage taught me which phrases mattered most. Not fancy apologies. Clear signals. Cultural differences played a role too. In American culture, direct communication is often valued in marriage. Feelings are discussed openly. In my background, endurance was praised more than expression. That mismatch caused confusion. When I stayed quiet, I thought I was being respectful. It was interpreted as distance. Neither of us was wrong. We were speaking different relational languages. Learning this changed everything. I stopped assuming my intentions were obvious. I began stating them plainly, even if the English sounded simple. I care. I am trying. I need help. These sentences felt small, but they carried weight. Studies on relationship satisfaction show that clarity beats eloquence. Every time. Marriage also forced me to face my past more directly. Old habits under stress resurfaced. Avoidance. Self-blame. Over-responsibility. The brain defaults to familiar patterns when overloaded. Recognizing this helped me separate present conflict from past wounds. Not every disagreement was a failure. Some were just growing pains. Slowly, something shifted. Not suddenly. Not perfectly. But steadily. As my English improved, so did my confidence in expressing needs. As my confidence grew, pressure eased. Not because life got easier, but because communication became clearer. One night, during a tense conversation, I paused and said, slowly, I feel pressure. Not from you. From everything. The sentence wasn't grammatically impressive. But it was accurate. And accuracy builds trust. The room softened. We breathed again. Marriage under pressure teaches you quickly what matters. Not winning arguments. Not sounding smart. But staying connected while imperfect. Language is a tool for that, not a test. If you're learning English inside a relationship and feel like you're failing more often than succeeding, remember this. Growth inside marriage is rarely loud. It happens quietly, through repeated repair. Through forgiveness practiced daily, not declared once. Marriage didn't break me in America. It stretched me until I learned how to speak honestly, even slowly. And that stretching made space for something stronger than fluency. Policies, paperwork, and stress. Paper doesn't look dangerous. It's thin, quiet, organized into neat stacks. But in America, paperwork carries weight. It decides where you can work, how long you can stay, and whether your future feels stable or fragile. For me, policies and forms became an unexpected language teacher, one that taught stress before vocabulary. Every document came with deadlines. Every deadline came with consequences. And every consequence lived in English. Legal English, to be precise. Long sentences. Passive voice. Words that sound familiar but mean something else entirely. My brain didn't just read. It decoded, double-checked, and panicked at the same time. Cognitive psychology explains why this is exhausting. When stakes are high, the amygdala activates, the brain's alarm system. Once that system is on, working memory shrinks. That's why even simple sentences feel impossible under pressure. It's not lack of intelligence. It's biology. Filling out forms made me doubt myself constantly. Is this the right box? Does current address include the apartment number? Why is one question repeated 3 times in different words? I read slowly, then reread, afraid that one misunderstanding could echo for years. Stress turned English into a threat instead of a tool. Policies also introduced me to a different cultural logic. In America, rules are written down. They are expected to be followed exactly. Back home, rules existed too, but flexibility lived between the lines. Here, interpretation felt risky. Just in case became my mental motto. Over-prepare. Over-document. Over-worry. This mindset spilled into my language learning. I became afraid of mistakes again. If paperwork punished errors, maybe conversation would too. That fear tightened my speech. Sentences shortened. Voice lowered. Silence crept back in, dressed as caution. Sociologists studying immigration stress call this bureaucratic trauma. Not dramatic enough to be obvious, but constant enough to wear you down. You carry it into conversations, relationships, and learning. Your brain stays in alert mode, scanning for danger where none exists. There was a moment when I realized how deeply this stress had settled. I was practicing English, reading a simple story, and my heart raced as if I were signing a legal document. My body couldn't tell the difference. Stress had generalized. Everything in English felt high stakes. That's when the question returned, firm but familiar. What are you ready to forgive? I had been blaming myself for struggling with forms, for needing help, for rereading the same sentence 5 times. Forgiveness meant recognizing that policies are not designed for emotional safety. They are designed for control and clarity. Struggling with them doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. I changed my approach. Instead of treating paperwork like an exam, I treated it like a translation exercise. I broke sentences down. Subject, verb, object. I wrote notes in plain English. I asked questions without apology. Language teachers emphasize comprehensible input. Bureaucracy offers the opposite. So I made it comprehensible manually. I also separated paperwork English from everyday English in my mind. One is formal, rigid, and unforgiving. The other is flexible, alive, and responsive. Mixing them caused unnecessary fear. Once I drew that line, my confidence in daily conversation returned. Stress management became part of language learning. Deep breathing before reading. Short breaks. Warmer environments. Studies show that lowering physiological stress improves comprehension immediately. This wasn't motivation talk. It was practical survival. Policies affected relationships too. Decisions about visas, insurance, and finances created tension. These weren't emotional conversations, but they carried emotional weight. I learned key phrases that helped. I don't understand this part. Can we check together? I need time to read. Simple, clear, protective sentences. Over time, paperwork taught me something unexpected. Precision matters. Clarity matters. English is powerful when it's exact. That skill transferred into my speaking. I became more deliberate. Less apologetic. More accurate. Stress had sharpened me, even as it exhausted me. There was still frustration. Waiting. Uncertainty. That never fully disappeared. But forgiveness softened it. I forgave myself for not mastering everything quickly. I forgave the system for being impersonal. And I stopped measuring my worth by my speed. One afternoon, after submitting a particularly complicated form, I noticed my body relax for the first time in days. Not because everything was solved, but because I had done my part. I had faced English at its most intimidating and survived. If you're learning English while navigating policies and paperwork, know this. Your fatigue is not a sign to quit. It's evidence of effort under pressure. Separate the language of control from the language of connection. They are not the same. English doesn't only belong to forms and rules. It belongs to stories, relationships, and growth too. Don't let bureaucracy convince you otherwise. And when that familiar question appears again, maybe the answer today is this. Forgive yourself for being overwhelmed in a system that was never designed to feel kind. Learning English through pain. Pain is an honest teacher. It doesn't care about your plans, your schedule, or your confidence level. It shows up uninvited and demands attention. For a long time, I tried to separate pain from learning. English was supposed to be productive, structured, clean. Pain felt messy, emotional, inefficient. But in America, the two slowly merged. until I realized something uncomfortable and freeing at the same time. Pain was already teaching me English. I just hadn't been listening. There were days when I couldn't study at all. Not because I was lazy, but because my mind felt heavy. Emotional fatigue has weight. Neuroscience shows that emotional pain activates the same brain regions as physical pain. When that system is active, concentration drops. Memory weakens. Language retrieval slows. I blamed myself for those days, thinking discipline would fix it. Discipline helped, but kindness helped more. Pain sharpened certain moments. A difficult conversation. A misunderstanding. A sentence that landed wrong and stayed wrong. Those moments replayed in my mind long after they passed. At first, I saw this as suffering. Later, I recognized it as emotional encoding. The brain remembers what hurts because it wants to protect you. That means words spoken during pain stick deeply. I started noticing which English sentences stayed with me. Not the ones from textbooks. The ones from real life. I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. I feel alone. These sentences weren't advanced, but they were powerful. They carried consequence. And because they mattered, my brain stored them carefully. Psychologists talk about meaning-based learning. Information tied to personal relevance is retained longer and accessed faster. Pain creates relevance instantly. When something hurts, it matters. Instead of avoiding that, I leaned into it, carefully. I didn't dramatize my pain. I translated it. When something painful happened, I wrote about it in simple English. Short sentences. Present tense. Honest words. Today was hard. I felt misunderstood. I wanted to disappear. This wasn't journaling for poetry. It was training for clarity. Each sentence connected emotion to language, building a bridge my brain could walk across again later. This changed how listening worked too. When I heard others express frustration or sadness in English, I understood faster. Emotion filled the gaps my vocabulary couldn't. Linguists note that emotional context improves comprehension even when linguistic input is incomplete. Pain tuned my ears. There's a risk here, of course. Pain can also shut you down if you stay inside it too long. Rumination doesn't teach. It traps. I learned to set boundaries. I chose moments to reflect, not live there permanently. Learning through pain requires movement, not dwelling. Forgiveness played a critical role. Pain without forgiveness turns into self-attack. I had to forgive myself for reacting emotionally, for struggling, for not being stronger. That forgiveness freed mental energy. And mental energy is the currency of learning. I noticed something else. When I spoke English from a place of pain, my voice sounded different. Slower. More deliberate. More real. People listen differently. Communication isn't just about words. It's about presence. Pain stripped away performance. I stopped trying to sound impressive. I tried to sound true. Therapists often say that naming pain reduces its intensity. Language gives shape to emotion. Once shaped, it becomes manageable. That's exactly what happened. English stopped being a shield I hid behind and became a tool I used to process life. Culturally, this was new for me. In my background, pain was handled privately. You endured quietly. In America, emotional expression is more normalized. People name feelings. They expect you to name yours too. Learning English meant learning this permission. Permission to say, "This hurts," without explaining everything. That shift didn't happen overnight. At first, I worried about burdening others. About sounding weak. But the response surprised me. Honesty invited connection. Not always solutions, but understanding. And understanding reduced isolation, which reduced pain, which improved learning. The loop closed gently. That familiar question returned, quieter now. What are you ready to forgive? I forgave myself for learning English through difficulty instead of ease. For not having a smooth story. For needing time. Forgiveness didn't erase pain, but it transformed it into information. Pain also taught me pacing. On hard days, I didn't push complex material. I listened to slow stories. Repeated familiar phrases. Neuroscience supports this. When emotional load is high, repetition of known patterns stabilizes the brain. Progress doesn't always mean new input. Sometimes it means deeper integration. One evening, after a particularly heavy day, I listened to a simple English story and understood every sentence. Not because it was easy, but because I was present. Pain had stripped distractions away. That clarity felt like a small victory. If you're learning English and going through emotional difficulty, don't wait until life feels perfect. It may never do that. Use what you feel. Translate it. Simplify it. Speak it slowly. Pain doesn't disqualify you from learning. It can guide you, if you let it. Learning English through pain taught me something essential. Growth doesn't come from comfort alone. It comes from meaning. And meaning often arrives disguised as difficulty. You don't need to escape pain to move forward. You need to listen to what it's already teaching you. Silence, identity, and the language you become. Silence used to scare me. In conversations, silence felt like failure. A pause meant I didn't know enough English, didn't react fast enough, didn't belong. I filled gaps with nervous smiles, simple words, or apologies I didn't mean. Over time, though, silence stopped being my enemy. It became a mirror. And inside that mirror, I began to see who I was becoming through language. In the early days in America, silence followed me everywhere. At work. In stores. On buses. People spoke quickly, confidently, as if words were unlimited. I spoke carefully, as if each sentence cost something. That difference made me feel smaller. I assumed fluency meant constant speech. I was wrong. Linguists describe silence as part of communication, not the absence of it. every culture uses silence differently. In some places, silence signals respect or thoughtfulness. In others, it feels uncomfortable. I had to relearn silence in English, not as emptiness, but as space. That shift began when I stopped apologizing for pauses. Instead of saying sorry when I needed time, I stayed quiet and thought. At first, this felt risky. But something surprising happened. People waited. Some even leaned in. Silence gave my words weight before I spoke them. Psychologically, silence reduces cognitive overload. When you're learning a language, your brain is juggling grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and social cues all at once. Silence gives your working memory room to breathe. I didn't know this at the time. I just felt calmer. With calm came clarity. I noticed patterns in how people spoke. Where they paused. What they emphasized. Silence sharpened my listening. Instead of rushing to respond, I absorbed tone, intention, emotion. Comprehension improved, even when vocabulary didn't. Identity entered quietly too. Learning English wasn't just adding words. It was reshaping how I saw myself. In my native language, I was expressive, quick, nuanced. In English, I was simpler, slower, more direct. I worried this meant I was becoming less intelligent. That fear stayed with me for a long time. But identity isn't fixed. It's contextual. Research in bilingual psychology shows that people often express different personality traits in different languages. This doesn't mean one is fake. It means language activates different parts of the self. English didn't erase who I was. It revealed another version. Silence helped me accept that version. When I spoke less, I observed more. I realized my English self was careful, reflective, precise. That wasn't weakness. It was a skill. I chose words deliberately. I meant what I said. There were moments when silence protected me. In emotional conversations, silence prevented me from saying something I couldn't take back. It allowed me to process feelings before translating them. Emotional regulation improves when you pause before responding. Silence wasn't avoidance. It was intelligence. I began practicing intentional silence. During conversations, I let questions hang for a second longer. I allowed myself to think in my native language, then respond in English without rushing. This reduced mistakes and anxiety. Fluency grew not from speed, but from confidence. Silence also changed how I studied. I stopped filling every minute with input. Instead of constant podcasts or videos, I built quiet time into learning. After listening, I sat with the language. Letting sentences echo. Letting meaning settle. Memory consolidation happens during rest. Silence made learning stick. There's a cultural lesson here too. In America, confidence is often associated with speaking up. I had to learn when to speak and when not to. Both mattered. Silence without intention felt like hiding. Silence with intention felt like presence. One afternoon, someone asked me a personal question in English. Normally, I would have answered quickly, defensively. That day, I paused. I chose my words carefully. The silence felt long, but it wasn't empty. When I spoke, my answer was honest and clear. The conversation deepened. Silence had opened the door. That experience changed how I saw language learning. English wasn't just a tool for survival. It was a tool for self-definition. Each sentence I spoke shaped how others saw me. Each silence shaped how I saw myself. There's pressure to sound native, to erase pauses, to speak faster. But speed doesn't equal mastery. Understanding your rhythm does. Silence helped me find mine. My English didn't need to sound like everyone else's. It needed to sound like me. Over time, silence stopped feeling heavy. It felt neutral, then useful, then powerful. I no longer feared not knowing what to say. I trusted myself to find the words when they mattered. If you're learning English and silence makes you uncomfortable, don't fight it immediately. Sit with it. Observe what it's telling you. Silence may be showing you where you're growing, where you're thinking, where you're becoming. Language doesn't only live in sound. It lives in pauses, in choices, in restraint. Who you become in English isn't defined by how much you speak, but by how intentionally you communicate. Silence didn't slow my progress. It shaped it. And in that quiet space, I finally heard my own voice, clearer than before. The moment I chose forgiveness. Forgiveness was not a sudden decision. It did not arrive like clarity or relief. It came slowly, quietly, after years of holding tension in my body and unfinished sentences in my mind. When I think about forgiveness now, I realize it began the moment I understood that carrying resentment was exhausting me more than it was protecting me. Living in America gave me distance from my past, but it did not erase it. Old memories traveled with me. They appeared during quiet evenings, during arguments, during moments when my English failed me and emotions took over. I noticed that when I felt misunderstood in English, I often reacted with anger that didn't belong to the present moment. It belonged to something older. Psychologists explain this as emotional memory. The brain stores unresolved experiences and reactivates them when similar stress appears. Language barriers created stress. Stress opened doors to the past. I began to see that forgiveness was not about other people anymore. It was about my nervous system. At first, forgiveness felt unfair. Some things should not be excused. Some pain was real. I confused forgiveness with forgetting, or with saying that harm was acceptable. That misunderstanding kept me stuck. Only later did I learn that forgiveness is not approval. It is release. The shift happened during a simple conversation. Someone apologized to me in English for something small. Instinctively, I said, "It's okay," even though it wasn't. Afterward, I realized how often I did that. In English, I minimized my feelings to keep conversations smooth. In my native language, I would have expressed more. That gap mattered. I was forgiving others verbally while still holding resentment internally. This internal contradiction created tension. My English sounded polite, but my body stayed rigid. Forgiveness couldn't be performative. It had to be embodied. I began practicing honesty in small ways. Instead of automatic forgiveness, I said, "I need time." That sentence changed everything. It gave me space. It respected my emotions without creating conflict. Language became a boundary, not just a bridge. Over time, I used that same principle with myself. I stopped demanding immediate forgiveness. Healing isn't efficient. It doesn't follow schedules. Neuroscience shows that emotional processing requires repetition and safety. Forgiveness emerges when the body feels safe enough to let go. English played a surprising role here. Because it was not my first language, it slowed my emotional reactions. I couldn't explode in English the way I could in my native tongue. That delay created reflection. Reflection created choice. Choice is where forgiveness lives. Not forced. Not rushed. Chosen. I remember the exact moment I realized I was ready. It wasn't dramatic. I was explaining an old story in English, and halfway through, I felt tired. Tired of repeating it. Tired of carrying it. The story no longer needed my energy. That was forgiveness. Forgiveness didn't erase the memory. It changed its weight. The story became information, not identity. Trauma researchers describe this as memory reconsolidation. When you revisit a memory without emotional overwhelm, the brain updates it. The past loosens its grip. Language helped with that update. English created emotional distance. Distance allowed reinterpretation. I could describe events without reliving them fully. That separation was healing. Forgiving myself was harder. I blamed myself for not knowing English sooner, for misunderstanding cultural cues, for staying silent when I should have spoken. Self-blame is common among immigrants. It gives an illusion of control. If it's my fault, maybe I can fix it. But blame is heavy. It slows learning. Studies show that self-compassion improves language acquisition by reducing anxiety. When I stopped attacking myself internally, my English improved externally. Words came easier. Confidence grew. Forgiveness became a daily practice. Not a final destination. Some days, old feelings returned. That didn't mean failure. It meant layers. Each layer asked for patience. I also learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can forgive someone without inviting them back into your life. Boundaries and forgiveness can coexist. This understanding was freeing. As my English became stronger, my emotional vocabulary expanded. I learned words like resentment, closure, accountability. Naming emotions gave me control over them. Emotional literacy is power. Forgiveness changed how I listened. I became less reactive. More curious. When misunderstandings happened, I asked questions instead of assuming harm. Communication improved. Relationships softened. There was a physical change too. My shoulders relaxed. My breathing deepened. The body remembers release. Forgiveness didn't make me passive. It made me lighter. Lighter people move faster, learn better, connect deeper. Choosing forgiveness was choosing forward motion. It was choosing to invest energy in building, not carrying. Language learning is already demanding. There was no space left for emotional baggage. If you're learning English while carrying unresolved pain, be gentle with yourself. Forgiveness may not be ready yet. That's okay. Readiness cannot be forced. But when the moment comes, you'll recognize it. Not by relief alone, but by quiet. A quiet that feels open, not empty. That quiet is where growth continues. Forgiveness didn't close my story. It cleared the space for the next chapter. Building a new meaning in English. Language does something strange when you live inside it long enough. At first, English was just a tool for survival. It helped you buy groceries, explain problems, nod politely at small talk you barely understood. But slowly, almost without permission, English began to hold meaning. Not dictionary meaning, emotional meaning. Certain words started to feel heavier. Others felt safer. This is the part nobody tells you about learning a language through life. Vocabulary doesn't only live in your mouth. It settles into your nervous system. In the beginning, English felt cold. Direct. Functional. People spoke fast, moved fast, forgave fast, forgot fast. That rhythm clashed with how you were raised. Where you came from, emotions lingered. Stories stretched. Silence meant something. In America, silence often meant discomfort. So you adapted. You learned to smile while processing confusion. You learned to say I'm fine while still sorting feelings internally. Linguists call this pragmatic adaptation, adjusting language use to fit social expectations. Emotionally, it's exhausting. Over time, though, something shifted. You didn't just translate your thoughts into English anymore. You began thinking in English. That's when meaning started to change. Thinking in English simplified emotions. Sentences became shorter. Feelings became clearer. Instead of long internal monologues, you had direct thoughts like this hurts or I need space. Simpler language reduced emotional noise. Cognitive science supports this. Using a second language can reduce emotional reactivity and increase rational processing. That reduction wasn't loss. It was clarity. English helped you rebuild meaning after forgiveness. Once the past loosened its grip, there was space to define who you were becoming. Words like home, family, and love took on new layers. They weren't tied to one place anymore. They became portable. You noticed this most in relationships. When conflict happened, English forced you to be intentional. You couldn't rely on dramatic language or cultural assumptions. You had to explain. Explanation slowed arguments. Slowness created understanding. This is where love changed. In English, love sounded quieter. Less poetic. More practical. I'm here. I support you. Let's talk. At first, that felt shallow. Later, it felt stable. Research on attachment shows that consistency matters more than intensity. English encouraged consistency. You also learned to express vulnerability differently. Saying I'm struggling in English felt exposed, but manageable. The emotional distance of a second language made honesty safer. It was like confessing behind glasses visible, but protected. That safety allowed growth. You began teaching yourself emotional phrases intentionally. Not fancy ones. Useful ones. I feel overwhelmed. I need reassurance. This matters to me. Each sentence was a small bridge between thought and connection. This practice improved not only your English but your relationships. Emotional clarity reduces misunderstandings. Misunderstandings are the root of most conflict. Culture played a role too. American culture values self-expression but expects emotional regulation. You learned that expressing feelings didn't require emotional flooding. You could be honest without being explosive. That balance took time. There were mistakes. Times when you sounded cold when you meant calm. Times when humor didn't land. Each mistake taught nuance. Language learning through life is feedback-driven. Painful feedback, sometimes. But meaning kept building. You started noticing that forgiveness had changed how you spoke. Your tone softened. Your sentences shortened. There was less need to justify. Less need to defend. Forgiveness simplified communication. Neuroscience explains this through cognitive load. When the brain isn't busy suppressing resentment, it processes language more efficiently. Emotional release frees mental resources. Your English fluency improved not because of grammar drills, but because of emotional lightness. You also noticed how climate and lifestyle shaped language. In colder regions, conversations felt more reserved. In warmer places, small talk flowed easily. These observations helped you understand that communication is environmental, not personal. That realization reduced self-blame. English became a mirror, not a judge. It reflected who you were becoming, not who you failed to be before. You started telling your story differently. Not as loss, but as transition. Not as damage, but as adaptation. Narrative psychology shows that how we frame our story determines our resilience. Language gives you that frame. In English, your story sounded more neutral. Neutral allowed reinterpretation. Reinterpretation allowed growth. You were no longer just surviving in America. You were building meaning here. Meaning through daily routines. Through shared meals. Through quiet evenings where English wasn't effort anymore, it was atmosphere. Forgiveness made that possible. Without it, English would have remained a surface language. With it, English became internal. And maybe that's the real milestone in language learning. Not fluency tests. Not accents. But the moment a language becomes a place you can rest. A place where your thoughts don't fight each other. A place where the past doesn't interrupt every sentence. Meaning isn't found. It's built. And you're still building. What you are ready to forgive. There comes a moment when learning English is no longer about progress. It becomes about honesty. Not grammar honesty, but emotional honesty. The kind where you stop pretending that motivation is the problem. And you admit that something heavier has been sitting quietly underneath your effort this whole time. By the time you reach this point in the story, forgiveness is no longer a dramatic word. It feels practical. Almost ordinary. You forgive so you can breathe better. You forgive so your thoughts don't interrupt each other. You forgive because carrying the past takes energy you need for the present. America teaches this lesson indirectly. Life here moves forward whether you're ready or not. Policies change. Seasons change. Children grow. English evolves. If you stay emotionally anchored to an old version of yourself, you don't fall behind loudly. You fall behind silently. That silence is dangerous. In language learning, silence often looks like stagnation. You listen but don't respond. You understand but don't speak. Psychologists link this to fear-based inhibition. When emotional safety is low, the brain prioritizes protection over expression. Forgiveness raises emotional safety. This is why forgiveness matters for your English more than you think. When you forgive, your brain stops scanning for threats. It reallocates energy to creativity, memory, and connection. That's when language becomes fluid. That's when sentences stop sounding rehearsed and start sounding real. You may notice this first in small moments. You answer without translating. You joke without planning. You explain your feelings without apologizing for them. These are not language achievements. They are nervous system achievements. Forgiveness also changes how you see America itself. Instead of viewing cultural differences as personal rejection, you begin to see them as neutral systems. Directness isn't rudeness. Distance isn't coldness. Speed isn't cruelty. This reframing reduces emotional friction. Reduced friction improves communication. You also stop romanticizing your past or demonizing it. You see it as context. Context is useful. It explains patterns without trapping you inside them. Narrative therapy emphasizes this shift, from "this is who I am" to "this is what happened to me." That shift is freedom. Now, when you practice English, you're not proving anything. You're participating. Participation feels lighter than performance. Performance demands perfection. Participation allows mistakes. Mistakes are essential. In fact, forgiving yourself for mistakes is one of the strongest predictors of long-term language success. Self-compassion lowers cortisol. Lower cortisol improves memory retrieval. Science agrees with kindness more than punishment. As your story settles, love also settles differently. Love becomes less about intensity and more about presence. In English, presence is expressed through consistency. Showing up. Following through. Listening without fixing. You may notice that your relationships feel quieter now. That's not distance. That's stability. Drama often disguises itself as connection. Forgiveness removes drama. What remains is choice. Choice is powerful. You choose which stories you repeat. You choose which words you keep using. You choose whether the past narrates your future or simply informs it. And now comes the most important question of this entire journey. Not a question to answer quickly. Not a question to answer publicly. A question to sit with. What are you ready to forgive? Not who. What? The version of yourself that didn't speak up. The years you feel you lost. The accent you still judge. The confidence you postponed. Forgiveness doesn't mean those things didn't matter. It means they no longer get the final word. When you forgive, English becomes more than a skill. It becomes a medium for growth. A space where you can be curious again. Where effort feels rewarding instead of draining. You don't need to rush this. Forgiveness unfolds at its own pace. Sometimes it arrives as understanding. Sometimes as exhaustion. Sometimes as quiet acceptance. All of it counts. The happy ending isn't perfect English. It's peace while learning. It's speaking without self-attack. It's listening without comparison. It's building a life where language supports you instead of measuring you. That's the real success story. If this journey felt familiar, it's because many people carry invisible weight while learning English. They don't lack discipline. They lack release. Release is learned. And forgiveness is how it begins. Some stories don't end when the pain disappears. They end when you decide to stop carrying it. If you're still learning English, still healing, still rebuilding your life in America or anywhere else in the world, remember this. Progress doesn't come from perfection, it comes from forgiveness. Forgiving your past doesn't erase it. It frees your voice. It quiets the fear. And it gives your English room to grow, naturally, honestly, confidently. This channel isn't just about real English listening, reading, and speaking practice. It's about real life. Real emotions. And real stories that help you move forward, one calm sentence at a time. Subscribe now if you want more slow, clear, real-life English stories that heal, inspire, and actually help you speak with confidence. Like the video if this story touched something inside you. Comment below, what are you ready to forgive today? Your next chapter doesn't start with better grammar. It starts with one brave choice. And this channel will walk with you through it.